SVC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by the CasinoBeats Summit, bringing you the future of play, iGaming strategy, innovation and development.
Be a part of the future of play at the CasinoBeats Summit this May. See new game releases, take in our innovation-focused conference agenda, and network with the casino industry elite. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the iGaming Daily podcast, where after a week in the bright lights of New York City, and more importantly, the hustle and bustle of the Meadowlands Exposition Center in New Jersey for the SBC Summit North America, we're back to our usual format of delivering you the biggest stories of the day. And oh boy, do we have a big one to address with a $1 billion merger and acquisition story to dig our teeth into, as Aristocrat moves on from its tango with Playtech and found a new dance partner in NeoGames as the two confirm a definitive combination agreement of $1.2 billion. On the face of it, from my perspective, the price seems a little high, a point I'll put to our guests, and with that in mind, later in the show, we'll be asking our guests one purchase that they made which at the time seemed a little too high but worth the money in the long run. But without further ado, I think it's time for me to stop talking and for our listeners to be introduced to our guests. So, could you just let the listeners know who you are? Craig, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Craig Davies. I'm the editor of CasinoBeats.
Perfect. And Ted?
Hi, I'm Ted Orme-Claye, and I'm the senior journalist with SBC News.
Magic stuff. So, let's get kickstarted into this, and Craig, we will come to you. Can you just provide us with a little bit of background detail with this acquisition, as it's not the first time, as we've mentioned with Playtech, that Aristocrat has dabbled in online gaming?
I'll try on the little. I'm not really sure I'll be able to stick to that too well. It goes back years. I was going to say months. It goes back years. Everyone knows that Aristocrat has been kind of looking to make, I suppose you could say, a statement purchase. They've been pretty consistent in stressing their iGaming ambitions over the last few years, particularly since the Playtech deal collapsed, but that's where it really starts. Like you said, they had this long tango with Playtech. It was a protracted purchase. You had different potential buyers coming in left, right, and centre. And it went on and on and on. And then just when you thought, I think it was a $2.7 billion deal was going to get over the line, shareholders shot it down. So that collapsed. In the earlier part of...
Just before you start going on, why did the shareholders shoot that down?
Off the top of my head, I can't exactly remember. Probably to do with price, I think, but that could be wrong. And, at me later with your complaints if you need to. But that collapsed. And we saw Aristocrat over the course of months keep stressing their ambitions. In the immediate aftermath of the Playtech deal collapsing, they came out and basically said this isn't the end of it. They had this build and buy strategy, they was calling it, but that wasn't just a case of M&A. That was a case of boosting the kind of in-house capabilities, making the correct appointments to strengthen that part of their business, get the right partnerships, kind of thing. So it was kind of M&A partnership and talent acquisition all in one. And we really saw that kick into gear from kind of like September last year. But in that meantime, we saw NeoGames purchase Aspire Global for just under $500 million. So if there's any thoughts of Playtech being that number one target and the settling for number two, that's not the case, because the makeup of NeoGames now is completely different to what it was at the time they was pursuing Playtech. And then we saw a number of appointments made. They established rebranded their real money aspect to Anaxi in around September last year. We've seen that kick into gear with a few partnerships in the US recently. They then bought Roxor Gaming, a UK-based studio, in October of last year, I believe it was, maybe September. So that was their kind of a little dabble into M&A there. And then we've seen today's deal, which on the surface looks like it will not have the same consequence as the Playtech deal, with over 60% of shareholders said to already be on board with it. So you'd imagine it would be slightly smoother sailing. Of course, there's all the legalities you've got to go through yet. And they've said within 12 months to finalise the deal. So things can go wrong, but you'd imagine it'd be slightly smoother sailing, and this will be the kind of like statement that they've been looking to make in a way.
Mm-hmm. And Ted, from a sports betting perspective, what does this deal mean for Aristocrat? Because NeoGames, if I am correct, they have Pito Bet, is it? How do you pronounce it?
BetaBet, yeah.
BetaBet,
which is one of, as Craig mentioned, they acquired Aspire Global last year. And that is one of Aspire Global's sort of flagship brands, and they onboarded that. Yeah, so BetaBet is a proven sports book. It's got a lot of experience. It's got a lot of partnerships, with a range of operators across the globe. I think something that's quite significant about it is, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Aristocrat haven't historically been involved in sports betting, really. They're probably predominantly in like game development. So this really marks kind of their entry into the space and a massive expansion of their foothold in it. If you just, and BetaBet, as I've said, load of different partnerships across the globe. So like in Africa, they've got several. In Kenya with Premier Bet, the Mozambique lottery operator. They've got one in Cameroon as well. Quite a significant one, I think, is Brazil. They've got a partnership with the state lottery of the second largest state. I think it's called Lotto Mineira. I may have butchered the pronunciation there, so if I have, I apologise.
You can add Ted in the chat as well now.
Yeah.
Get all your complaints in.
We're going to try and break a record with this one. Come on. Also in Brazil, they've got a deal, a daily fantasy sports deal with Flutter Entertainment. Obviously, that's a huge global brand, and this is also quite significant because, as we all know, Brazil just last week put in the federal government put in draft legislation to legalise sports betting. So it looks as that's taking one step closer to coming about, and then any company that can get a good foothold in there, I think they're definitely looking at that as quite a big opportunity. Also, back in Europe, BetaBet have got several partnerships as well. So they've really acquired quite a proven supplier in sports betting with this. So yeah, I think they'll probably be very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and Craig, I'm going to come back to you for this question because obviously, me and you, we worked on CasinoBeats for a number of years. Aristocrat are not a small company when it comes to kind of the land-based sector. They're probably one of the biggest in the US, I'd say. Why have they gone down this M&A merger acquisition route when they are so big? Why couldn't they develop something in-house to start combating online? Why did they need a NeoGames or a Playtech when they did their song and dance with them?
I think in a way, Ted might have just answered that by detailing, I know he's talking about B2Bet, but you can look at Aspire Global as a whole when you talk about the proven nature of it. They've already got that inroad. If you're kind of going in-house, you've kind of got to then undertake all that work on top of it. But with Aspire, B2Bet, obviously get the PAM in Aspire, you've got the sports platform in B2Bet, you've got the aggregation aspect in Paraplay. So all these things, all these inroads that have already been made, instead of starting from scratch, I presume is a major factor in it. You see it through several companies. I mean, I know we're looking at Aristocrat here, but you see it time and time again. M&A over recent times is the route that companies are increasingly taking.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of a quick yes or no question from you both. At the start of the show, I said on the face of it, this 1.2 billion valuation is quite steep. Would we agree with that statement? Or actually, now we've just done a little bit of a delve into what comes with the acquisition, is it a fair price? Yes or no? Ted?
I'm going to go with yes, it is a reasonable price.
Perfect. And Craig?
I tend to agree for all the reasons we've just said.
Perfect. I'm actually also going to do a U-turn from what I said. So maybe it's not too steep. Maybe it is a good value for money that they've purchased. Ted, we're going to come to you for the next one. as part of this acquisition, NeoGames are now a privately held company, and they were publicly listed before this acquisition. What changes? What's different now? They're privately owned compared to publicly listed companies.
Well, obviously, so they're currently a NASDAQ-listed enterprise. They're going to be delisting from that to then become a subsidiary of Aristocrat, which trades on the ASX exchange. Obviously, well, one of the biggest one of that is it just means the general, say the general public, general investors won't be able to buy shares in it on the stock market anymore. I think really structurally the biggest development there is that Aristocrat have said that they're going to merge one of their existing subsidiaries. They haven't said which one, into NeoGames, which will then sort of continue functioning under its own, functioning under its own identity with its own brands, just part of their wider portfolio. I think I've got that right. I do apologise if not.
There's another tick on Ted's mistakes.
So that's the most significant part of it from the perspective of going from publicly listed to privately, I think, is the fact that Aristocrat are making this sort of big structural change within their own organisation in order to bring them in and let them carry on doing what they're doing. Obviously, the main things to remember is that NeoGames still do need to get approval from the rest of their shareholders, although, as Craig said earlier, from what we understand, about 60% of them have approved it already, and I think they only need, but that means they need like 6 or 7% more to approve. And then there's regulatory approvals, but I think once the shareholders have gone for it, I don't really see any hurdles in the way from going from currently publicly listed to being part of Aristocrat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that's been covered in pretty decent detail by Ted there.
Thank you.
Perfect. And there's another question that I've got here, but I feel like, Ted, we might have answered this one, but if there's anything you want to add to it, here's your time now. From a sports betting point of view, how does this acquisition strengthen Aristocrat in the sports betting vertical? I know we've already mentioned some of the companies that they'll get as part of the deal, but is there anything else that you think may come of this?
Market access, to be fair, is quite a big one. I mean, I know we talked earlier about, could this 1.2 billion evaluation be considered too much? I think one of the big things that Aristocrat have looked into is sort of total addressable market. And from what I remember, I think they said something like BtoBet has a total addressable market of 48 billion. So that's the main thing with them. As I said, they've got they've got an inroad in Brazil. That's from the outset, that looks like it's going to be a massive market. There's already loads of big operators who are looking to make inroads there themselves, as well as lots of local firms. I think another big one to look at could also be the US. I mean, we've seen since the repeal of PASPA that sports betting has taken off in the US a lot quicker than iGaming. A lot of states are a lot more willing to regulate and open their markets to sports betting, but seems to be a bit more reluctant to online casino. So I think having a sportsbook platform like BtoBet could provide them with quite a good foothold there in a few US states if they choose to pursue that path.
Cool. And Craig, similar question, but actually from the casino side of things. We've already mentioned how big Aristocrat are in terms of the land-based sector. What can we expect from them now moving forward? And they've just done this massive leap towards the online gaming vertical.
It remains to be seen what jurisdictions they're going to specifically go after. The market access part that Ted's just mentioned for BtoBet can carry over the entire operation. That's huge, like we said, starting from scratch, or M&A, you've got that immediate market access. The one thing I would add, which is kind of the question mark of the deal, we're very much focused on the Aspire Global side, but we forget that NeoGames was its own entity in its own right before that deal with Aspire Global as an iLottery. In the iLottery side of things, sorry. So that's the question mark for me. What is Aristocrat's goal? What's its ambitions with that iLottery side? I mean, Aristocrat, like you've said, it's got this deep land-based footprint, and within that is a lot of well-known and popular IP. So they could, I don't want to say very easily, but what one route there would be to combine this IP with the iLottery side and try and make some inroads on that side of things. That's like I say, that's the question mark for me. You kind of, in this conversation, we've kind of forgot that NeoGames had its own operation before the Aspire Global deal. It just remains to be seen how Aristocrat go about targeting that.
No, it's a very good point to bring up. It's definitely something that slipped to my mind. But we've already mentioned it's. I'm going to use a reference and it might be a bit cringe. We've already mentioned it's song and dance with Playtech, but are we now finally seeing the last dance between Aristocrat and Playtech?
I think that was long done as soon as shareholders voted it down, if I'm being honest. I think that was from the statements made by Aristocrat just after that deal had collapsed. There was no chance of it being revived. There was very much focused on the path forward, you could say, rather than looking behind. They came out very quickly in this build and buy strategy centered around all them core aspects that I mentioned before. They became very focused on where can we go from here, what statement can we make. They rebranded, like I said, what's now Anaxi. They made the purchase of Roxor Gaming. They've done a number of partnerships, made a number of hires. They've been very focused on moving forward rather than trying to resurrect any deal for Playtech, which has gone very quiet too, just in general. But I think there was just very focused on kind of what's next, just move on rather than pine over what could have been.
Mm-hmm. And we've already stated that the transaction will be completed in the next 12 months, or that's what Aristocrat stated in the press release. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, up to 12 months, I think it said.
Yeah, 12 months.
Yeah, so here's something. In the next 12 months, what could derail this deal? Or is it now just smooth sailing? Now there was 61% of the stakeholders who approved it. Is it now just terms and conditions, formalities, checks, and so forth?
It would appear so. I mean, after what happened with Playtech, you could forgive Aristocrat for being a little on edge until they got those final shareholder approvals. From what I understand and from what I see, it's when rather than if, like was the case with Playtech. But I have been wrong. It has been known, believe it or not.
Perfect. And that's all the questions that I have in terms of this acquisition story or the merger and acquisition story. But I did say at the start of the show that we were going to delve into a purchase that we made, which on the face of it seemed a bit steep, but in the long run was worth its weight in gold. So, Ted, we're going to start with you. What is one purchase that you made which you were like, ooh, that's going to hit the bank balance a little bit, but then you liked it afterwards?
Thinking back, probably a ticket to Leeds Festival back when I was a student in my first year at university. Obviously, as a student, didn't have a lot of cash.
Leeds Festival is a music festival, just to confirm for our global audience.
For our local, for the global audience, yeah. It was about, it must have been about £300. And then obviously money on top of that for like tents, food you're spending, having some beers and all that. Yeah, a lot of money, especially as a student, but that turned out all right. And this year I've actually ended up spending a similar amount on a ticket to Glastonbury as well. So I'm really hoping there's going to be a repeat of that same scenario turning out that it'll be worth the cash, because that's hit me hard this year.
Perfect. And then Craig?
So we recently bought a puppy, which was very much my wife's desire. She'd always wanted one. I'd managed to put the block on it due to asthma, but these damn hypoallergenic puppies, I had no defense. I was very skeptical, never had a puppy, never had a pet of any kind because of my asthma, but it's great. I love it.
How long have you had what's the puppy's name now?
Milo. He's a Cavapuchin. He's a triple breed.
A Cavapuchin?
Yeah, we've had him just over a week.
And you're forever in love now, yeah?
Yeah, he's sat right here now, right next to me. He's engrossed by this podcast.
And he's remained silent, so he is a good boy.
I can't wait to get off this, and he's making noise.
Perfect. And I'll give you mine as well. Mine is fairly recent as well, not as recent as Milo. But I went to Star Wars Celebration in, I believe it was April. And one of the add-ons that you can have on T-Ticket is a meet and greet with some of the stars. And I thought in the back of my head, it'll be about £100 or so. And I really wanted to meet Ewan McGregor, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the prequels, and Hayden Christensen, who played Anakin Skywalker in the prequels. And when the tickets came out, they cost Ewan was £270, and Hayden Christensen was about $230, which was quite steep for me. And I remember we bought the Ewan one, things changed last minute, and that one was a bit disappointing. But Hayden Christensen, oh my. I went to see him and he gave us that Anakin Skywalker deep look into my eyes, and my knees just went weak. So it was quite a beautiful moment for me. But that's me. That's our interesting purchases, which we then went on to love, and it had the value that we wanted it to have. And this was everything for the iGaming Daily podcast on Aristocrat's acquisition of NeoGames. To Ted and Craig, thank you for joining us today. To our listeners out there, thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with the CasinoBeats Summit, being held at the Intercontinental Malta on the 23rd to the 25th of May. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.